welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Debunking Missionary Claims with Rabbi Moshe Shulman. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
How are you today?
Okay, everything's fine.
Good.
We had a little discussion here as to which one. This is number 35. This is 35?
This would be 36. No, 35, part 6. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine.
35, part
by
6.
the way, I see you and I don't see myself. Myself isn't, I don't know if that's what's supposed to be.
Okay. I see you fine, and you can see me still, right?
Okay.
You don't need to see me, though, if you don't want to see me, right?
No, that's okay.
Okay.
Doesn't make a difference.
I give you something to look at anyway.
Now I know it's somebody listening to me, so
Exactly.
Everybody's listening to me is myself. Okay. Okay, so we're going to continue this week with Unkosher Jesus. Last week I spent a lot of time going over things since it was a different time slot. I went over everything I did from the beginning, so this week I don't really have to do that. What I'd like to do actually before we actually start back to Unkosher Jesus, this week is in fact a very important parsha when it comes to issues as far as counter missionaries. As you know, one of the biggest points that missionaries make is that without blood there's no atonement. Quoting Leviticus 17. Now, this week's parsha that we read, Parsha Shemini, which is about, I think it's chapters 9, 10, 11, something like that, actually has a proof that that's actually not the case. So I don't know if you've seen it before, William, but we'll go through it a little bit quickly.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, this is in chapter 10. Now, I will do a whole thing on, I will eventually get to a whole thing about atonement and everything like that. We'll go through all the sacrifices, everything. Each sacrifice is very different. In the two parshas of Vayikra and Tzav, the main thing that we've learned is that there's certain sacrifices, and specifically sin sacrifices, require that the priest, after the end part of it is that there are portions of it that the priest has to eat. Okay? It basically provides sustenance for the priests. They get paid off by giving from the sacrifices. So this week's parsha, we see something very interesting. Moshe gets angry at his brother. So let's just see what's in the parsha here. And in verse 12, I won't go through the actual things because it's somewhat complicated. I'd have to go through the whole background of sacrifices before we could do it. But in chapter 10, verses 12 to 15, it talks about how the sons of Aaron, on the first day when they made the tabernacle, they had to bring certain sacrifices. Some were specific for the tabernacle stuff, and some of them because it was the first day of the month. The Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, there are certain sacrifices that have to be done. One of the sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh is a chatas, a sin sacrifice. Now the Talmud talks about what it's used for. It's actually one of the things that's a misunderstanding. The word chatas really means purification. So it was a purification on Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month. There was a sacrifice for the purification of the temple or the tabernacle. So what happens is, of course, the law is that these sacrifices are supposed to be brought. The blood is sprinkled where it's supposed to be, and then the priest is supposed to eat it, and that's what they're required to do. So what happened is, in fact, we find out that they didn't do that for one of the sacrifices. That was specifically the sacrifice that was for the new moon, the Rosh Chodesh. Okay, that sin sacrifice, the chatas, the purification sacrifice for Rosh Chodesh, they didn't do. So the verse says in 16, as se'ir chatas duresh Moshe, that the goat of the sin offering for the new moon, Moshe was searching out what happened to it. But he saw it, and he found that it was burned. Rather than being eaten, they burnt it. The yiksayf ala luzav ala esuma b'nei aharon on nesudim laima, that he got angry on the children that were left over to Aharon, Eluzah, and Suma, and he asked the question, Madua modia loy achaltem es hachatas b'mukam hakodesh. Why is it that you didn't eat this purification sacrifice, this sin sacrifice, in the holy place?
What chapter and verse are you in again? I forgot.
I am now reading verse 16 and 17 in chapter 10 of Leviticus.
Okay.
Now my translation is coming from Am I reading it directly? I have the thing on the side, but I'm reading correctly because I want to make it clear. So they asked, why didn't you eat of the sin sacrifice, or purification sacrifice is probably better, because it was for purification of the tabernacle, which you do once a month. Because the Holy of Holies, it's the highest level of holiness sacrificing. The Oisa Nusnechem, and she is given to you. He is given to you. The size as a line hu'ida, in order to raise up, to atone for the sin of the congregation, the chaper alayhem, to cause atonement to them, if not before Hashem. Okay, now let's get this clarified. What is Moses angry about? Okay, he's angry because they didn't bring the sacrifice. And why are they didn't eat the sacrifice? Okay, so why are they angry because he didn't eat it? Because the verse says he's angry because it was given to them, eating it, in order to cause atonement. Okay, then it can huvi as duma koita penima, and also you didn't bring the blood in the inner parts. Uchatoichi oiser, and you didn't eat it. The koich kashatzi, and you didn't eat it in the holy place as you were commanded to do. Now, afterwards, Aaron explains the reason why. That's a little bit complicated. We do the sacrifice with it again. But what do we see here clearly? We see that Moshe was complaining about what? He was complaining because they didn't eat of the sacrifice, because that would bring atonement to the people for the sin of this particular sin talking about here is unintentionally causing the tabernacle to become unclean, which we'll go into all those in the sacrifices. So what do we see? That it's not the blood on the Mizbeach, on the altar, that does anything. It's actually that the priests eat afterwards of it. That's what causes the atonement to happen. Okay? As I once replied to somebody, it's not the blood, it's actually the barbecue afterwards. That's what does it. So if the priests don't eat the barbecue, you don't get atonement.
That's really, really good information. Yeah. No doubt.
We'll discuss it more because it's actually part of the text when we read it. And when we go to the sacrifice of atonement, we'll talk about it. But here you see the actual text where Moshe spells it out clearly. His anger was because the atonement could not be effected because they didn't eat of it as they were supposed to. Okay, let's go back a little bit on what we've done before. We'll do a very quick thing. Remember, we're talking about, we're going into really the other side of the story about Jesus, what kind of person he really was. And we're comparing between the claims that were given that Jesus is perfect as opposed to what we actually see in the New Testament. Again, it's always good to remember that we see clearly in one instance where Jesus seems to acknowledge himself that he required atonement for sins, where he goes to John, who everybody agrees that John's baptism was because of sins, and Jesus went willingly, clearly in the Synoptics, he went there clearly that he was going to get atonement for sin. Now, the first sins that we discussed about, and that's what we've done mostly until now, deals with the issues of how Jesus dealt with his parents. We gave a couple issues showing how he showed disrespect to his mother. In fact, in one of them, in the verse John, in John 2, chapter 1, verse 1 to 3, we see clearly that he was actually quite abusive towards his mother. The other one in Luke, which we have, isn't actually so much abusive, it's just not very considerate of his mother, both of which showing clear violations of the commandment in the Torah that you are supposed to honor your parents. We have another couple instances here where we see that his mother comes to see him with his brothers, and Jesus refuses to go to see his mother, or to acknowledge again another instance of showing a lack of honoring his mother. Then we dealt with a couple issues dealing with Jesus honoring parents after death. We have when Matthew and Luke talks about it, and we compare that with the story with Elijah, prophet, Elijah the prophet with his student Elisha, where Elisha gets chosen out, where Elijah specifically allows him to go back to say goodbye to his parents and to take care of his family affairs, where Jesus, in fact, does not, even in a case where, not just going back, but a case where it involved the case of burying a parent. And then we have a case of hypocrisy of Jesus, where he tells the Pharisees that they're violating Hashem's word by telling people that they have to keep their oath, even though it's going to cause financial burden to parents, whereas he himself tells one of his people to give away all his money, and by that his parents won't have anything. Then last week we started dealing with issues of Jesus himself, what kind of a person he was himself. Now, again, I want to point out in John 2:1-4, we see how Jesus shows abusiveness towards his mother. And as we would expect, if you're that abusive towards your parents, you're obviously going to be abusive to other people also. And so we see two instances where we see how Jesus is abusive towards people, especially the Pharisees who happen to disagree with him. We preface that with a famous story from Hillel, where people came to Hillel to try to get him to get angry before Shabbos, and Hillel, of course, did not get angry. Whereas, of course, we see Jesus, the exact opposite is the case. Jesus calling people fools, especially the Pharisees and stuff like that. We see in Matthew, twice in Luke. And the other example we see is him being unable to control his anger with the instance in the temple, where we pointed out that, in fact, rather than the thing in the temple being something that was negative and not giving honor to Hashem, it was actually the exact opposite. It was showing a love for the Jewish people in order to make it easier for them to fulfill their obligations, and nobody was stealing from anybody. Everything was being done properly, and showing anger there. Okay, so let's go on to some more other things here. Some other examples of where we see actions where he falls short from acting in ways that are Torah mandated. Okay, so let's deal with the first instance. Let's first deal with what the Torah says. I wanted to go to Deuteronomy 20. And we're going to look specifically at verses 19 and 20. But I want to give a little bit of introduction to hear what's going on here. Okay. Now, in this particular passage here, we're dealing with the laws of when you go to war. War is a very common thing. So, of course, Hashem will give laws as to how you're supposed to do it properly, in a way that it's limited as far as things are concerned. You're not allowed to do certain things. So here it says here, it talks about when you go to the war, and it's telling people, listen, not everybody should go out. If you're afraid, or if there's certain other things that keep you back, you shouldn't go to war. That's the first verses. Then it talks about actually how the war is going on. So it says in verse 19, Kisutzir el ir yom rabim, if you are besieging a city for many days, to fight a war with them. V'safsu, in order to capture it, l'sashches es aitza v'nidach hagarzim. You shouldn't cut down the trees that are around there. Okay? Trees around cities always have areas around it where there's vegetation, where you're growing plants and things like that. So the Torah says you're not supposed to cut it down. Keep in many cycle, because that's what people eat. Fruit-bearing trees you're not supposed to destroy. In fact, that's the way it is today. It's very difficult in a place like where I live, where you move in. If you're trying to build a house in a place where they have trees, there's restrictions on actually not what you're talking. Is a tree like it's saying it's a tree like a man of war fighting against you. It's not fighting against you. Here you have a fruit tree. It's not fighting against you. So you shouldn't destroy it. However, a tree that that doesn't have fruit. So a tree that gives fruit, meaning that people have fruit, can live from it, they get fruit. It's a tree that has fruit on it, you're not supposed to do anything about it. But a tree that doesn't have fruit, that doesn't give fruit, that's not usable, you can use it for firewood and stuff like that. Those kinds of trees you can do. But say, if you have an apple tree, for example, you don't cut it down you're not allowed to cut it down to use for firewood and stuff like that. But if it does, you have a tree that doesn't have that, then you cannot use it. Okay? That's what the Torah says. Now, let us look at a very famous story that is very well known. It appears in Mark and Matthew. Let's look at first Mark 11:12-14, and then look at Matthew. And after we look at that, we're going to look back at the Talmud, which has a very similar story. So here we're looking at Mark, chapter 11, 12-14. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. Very important. It was not the time of year when you're supposed to find figs on the tree. So, okay, he said, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. So he curses the tree. Now, a few verses later, in verse 20, it says, "In the mornings they passed by, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. Then Peter remembered and said to him, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered.'" Okay? Now it says all kinds of justifications, whatever. So here what do we see? Jesus comes on a tree. Now it's not the season when it's supposed to be, but it's still alive. Even when it's in the winter, trees are still alive. You can see it alive, but it's living. It's a fruit tree, which the Torah tells us we're not allowed to cut down. We're not allowed to destroy fruit trees because they will give out fruit. It's not the season. Jesus curses it. And when they go by it, again, they see that it is dead. Let's see Matthew's story on that.
Just out of curiosity, isn't it kind of strange that even in this particular story, it would appear that Jesus had the power of death, but he does not have the power of life? Because if he had the power of life, he could have said, "Bear fruit," and it mysteriously grew in front of his eyes.
Yeah,
Right?
let's hold that question for a second. Okay? That question is a very interesting question, but I don't want to deal with that yet.
Okay.
Let's go to chapter 21, 18-22. Okay, in the morning when he returned, he was hungry, seeing a fig tree by the side of the road, he went to it and found nothing at all on it but leaves. Then he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" Jesus answered, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith in if you have faith in all you do, what he's done with the fig tree." So, okay, fine. Again, Matthew's story is a little bit bunched together, whereas in Mark, it's the next day he sees Matthew's bunched together, but essentially the same story. We once talked about this, I think, before. Lacona brings it, that, you have to realize that these stories are like Greek biographies, where they change the legends, they mix it together, they don't make it exactly the same. So if you're looking for inerrancy of an exact stories of what actually historical stuff, you're not going to find it here. Okay, so as I said, we should look back at what the rabbis say about this, and this is going to get you a question. There's a very interesting story in Tractate Tanis, 24a, and I'll read it. So one day he hired workers, I can't remember which the rabbi was, and he did not bring for them to eat. The workers told the son that they were hungry. They were sitting under a fig tree. So the son said, the son of this rabbi said, fig tree, bring forth ye fruit, and the workers ate from it. This is one of the people in that. A similar story with what's happening in the New Testament here. There was a tree, and the workers, people were hungry. They come up to a fig tree. The fig tree has nothing on it. And he says, bring forth your fruit. And the fruit is brought forth. Okay? Again, let's look at it again. The Torah tells us we're not supposed to destroy trees. As you pointed out, if you have the power to destroy it, you certainly have the power to bring it out. We see in the Talmud, of course, that just simple people, well, this person was obviously not a simple person, but this person was able to bless the tree that brings forth figs, and it actually brought forth figs for these people to eat. So Jesus could have done just the same thing himself.
Oh, nice.
But again, what does he do? He does something which violates what the Torah tells us to do, and that's destroying trees. It's very interesting to note that the Torah seems to be very environmental friendly.
Yeah, right.
Very, very modern in that it says something that can be used for fruit, can be for eating, stuff like that, you're not supposed to destroy. Something that's not for eating, then Hashem gave it to you to be used for other uses, for wood, firewood, furniture, and stuff like that. But if Hashem gives it to you for fruit to eat from, that you're not supposed to destroy. Whereas we see, of course, Jesus does do it. Now, again, we're going to go into the apologetic literature. It's always nice to look and see what people are saying about it, because when you see something strange like that, we said, you can't be the only one who has ever seen it. And actually, some people did see it. Okay, so first one is, let's do the hard sayings. It's mentioned there. So he asks the question here, why was a fig tree cursed? The instance is read in Mark in the more compressed form in Matthew. According to Mark, Jesus and his disciples spent the night of Jerusalem and Bethany. Next morning they returned to Jerusalem. On the way he felt hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree, he went to find it. When he reached Jerusalem, then Jesus cursed the tree, made no idea. They continued on the way into Jerusalem, where they cleansed the temple. And in the evening they returned to Bethany. Next morning they passed it. Okay, fine. Reads the story, which we just did. So here it is. Now, quoting a fellow named Christie, the facts connected with the fig tree are these. Toward the end of March, the leaves begin to appear. And about a week, the foliage coating is complete. Coincident with this, and sometimes before this, there appears quite a crop of small knobs, not real figs, but the kind of early forerunner. Okay, they grow to the size of green almonds, in which conditions are eaten by peasants, others when hungry. When they come to their own indefinite maturity, they drop off. These precursors of figs are called taksh in Palestinian Arabic. I don't know Arabic, so I can't tell you. Their appearance is a harbinger of the fully formed appearance of the true fig some 6 weeks later. So as Mark says, the time for figs had not yet come. It was 6 weeks early. But if the leaves appear without any taksh, that is a sign that there will be no figs, and Jesus found nothing but leaves without the taksh. He knew that it was an absolutely hopeless, fruitless fig tree. Okay, fine. So the fig tree would not grow. Again, the question, of course, which you ask, and the question, of course, which the Talmud answered correctly. The question that you asked is, why did he curse it and why didn't he bless it? And the answer in the Talmud is, of course, you should bless the tree to give fruit, figs. That's the whole purpose of it. If you have the power to do it, that's what you're supposed to do. Of course, Jesus gives the wrong answer. Okay? Now, again, the passage in the Talmud is extremely important because we have to realize that the Talmud is basically dealing in a period of time, not really so much after that. So they're dealing with the type of period of time, the type of social structure, type of societal structure, and societal ideas that would be around the time of when he lived. So giving a blessing to the tree to make the fruit grow, as the Talmud points out, is actually the right answer. If you give an answer on the test, you go up to a tree and the tree, you're basically, powerful being that are able to, your blessings are able to do. The question you answer is, what do? You go to a fig tree and the fig tree does not have figs on it and you're hungry. What answer? What are you supposed to do? And answer number one is you curse it, should never have figs ever again. Or number two, you bless it so that figs should grow on immediately so you should be able to eat. The true answer is two. But Jesus did number one. So he got the answer wrong. As simple as that. That's not what you're supposed to do. Now, let's go into the Jewish New Testament commentary. That, of course, is always very interesting because they try and give it a little bit of a spin. They always try and give it positive, but they always try to give a spin where it looks good for Jesus. So here it is. Okay, now, if Yeshua's cursing and drying up the fig tree had been a petulant reaction to disappointment because he couldn't satisfy his hunger, it would be unworthy of anyone, let alone the Messiah. That's quite true. It is totally unworthy of anyone, including the Messiah, as the Talmud shows us. If you're hungry, you bless it. But Yeshua is making a point by means of a prophetic drama acting out parable. So it's all right to curse the tree. Now, the problem with that, of course, is very simple. In the Torah we see in Deuteronomy, which I pointed out to you, is that Hashem doesn't say that. Hashem says that under no condition, even a condition when you have a need for it, you don't destroy trees that are fruit-bearing trees. Even if it's not the season, it's anything. You just don't do that. That's not what you're supposed to do. Okay, so that is that one. How are we doing for time?
We are 25 minutes in.
Okay. I got a long one going here.
Okay.
The next one's going to be quite long. It's going to be quite fun because I have a lot of sources on it. Do you want to try to open it for questions, or if there's no questions, I'll go on to it until the end of the hour. But if not, we'll take some questions because I don't want to leave this in the middle. There's a lot of good stuff on this next one.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I don't see, right off the bat, I don't see any questions. Yeah, I don't see any questions here yet. I can open up the phone lines, though, and...
Yeah, I'll open up the phone lines.
Okay.
And as you're opening up the phone lines, we will talk a little bit.
Okay.
I'll introduce the subject. We don't really get into it. We will certainly do it next week. But it's also another one. There are actually two issues usually brought up about actions that Jesus did in the New Testament that are brought up as being somewhat strange and showing some kind of a character flaw in Jesus. The first one, of course, was the one destroying the tree. And the second one deals with the very famous one, his exorcism, where he exorcises a demon and he sends it into pigs and makes the pigs jump off a cliff. So it's going to take me a long time to deal with this, but I'll just give you an idea of things. See if anybody calls in. But give you a little bit of an idea of how we're supposed to look at this, how the Talmud looks at it, meaning how first century Jews looked at the idea of how are we supposed to deal with animals, what we now call animal rights. Okay?
Okay.
So there's a very interesting Gemara in Tractate Gittin, 62a. And this is actually the law. This is not something that's just said. This is actually the law until today. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, a man is not allowed to eat anything until he has given food to his animals. As it says in Devarim 11, I have given grass in your fields for your animals. And then it says after that, and you will eat and you will be satisfied. So the Torah gives in order. First it says, I have given you for your animals to eat, and then you will eat. Indicating that, in fact, if you have animals that you are required to, you have your own farm animals, you have animals, say you have a dog at home or a cat, okay? Before you sit down to eat, you are required to give them to eat first. Okay? That's actually a commandment. It's in the law codes and applies today also. You're supposed to give to your animals, make sure. So if you have a dog, you should make sure you feed your dog first before you eat. You don't want your dog to be sitting by the table hungry watching you eat and not having something to eat themselves. Okay? This shows a certain sensitivity, besides the verse says, Hashem says what we're supposed to do, but it's teaching us you're supposed to have a certain sensitivity towards animals. Now, there's a Medrash Tehillim, on Psalm 37. Brings a very, very famous Medrash, very well known. As we know in the Parsha of Noah built an ark, and they lived in the ark the whole time, for a year. So, the Medrash says, they asked Shem ben Noach, they called him Machi Tzedek, which in the Torah is referred to as Shem ben Noach, and he asked him, how were you able to leave the ark? What was the merit? What kind of action did you do? What was the mitzvah that you do? What was the command that merited, not that you just should go into the ark, but that you should actually be able to leave the ark afterwards? And so he said, because of the charity we did there. So, that's the question. What kind of charity is it possible for you to do the ark? Were there any poor people there? There weren't any poor people there. It was only Noah and his sons and the family. That's who was there. How could you do charity there? So he said, no. The charity we did was with the animals, and the domestic animals, the wild animals and the birds. We gave them food to eat all night long. We were busy all day and all night giving them food. That was a charity that we had. Giving them was our charity. And then Avram was the one who was asking him, said, if that's the case, then you certainly did charities. And you certainly merited to be able to go up because of the charity you get to the animals. Again, very, very modern type of an idea we see here in the rabbis of how to treat animals and having respect and treating them properly and stuff like that. Something you would find very, very modern. Okay? I want you to keep this in mind, how modern you would think. You would think that this medrash specifically here was written by somebody in the 20th century, the 21st century. This kind of a concept. Okay? Another very famous one in Medrash Rabbah, in Parsha Shmos, chapter 2, paragraph 2. When Moshe was in the desert, it's a very famous story, of course. Moshe in the desert, what was he doing? He was a shepherd for his father-in-law. And what happened is one small goat, a kid, ran away. And Moshe ran after him until he got to a ditch. The Medrash saying he fell into a ditch. He tells a little bit more about the story. Is when Moshe arrived in the ditch, he saw there was a stream of water, and the kid was standing there drinking. When Moshe arrived and saw that the kid was drinking water, I said, I did not know that you could run because you were thirsty. You must be very tired. So what did he do? He took the kid on his shoulder, and he carried him back. Hashem said, because of that, because you have compassion to bring back the sheep, as if it was one made of flesh and blood, because of that, you are merited to be the shepherd of my sheep, the Jewish people. So this medrash is teaching a couple of things. First of all, it's giving what did Hashem see in Moshe that he made him the leader of the whole Jewish people? Because he had the concern for this one animal. But even more, again, what it shows us is again, we'll put that the rabbis recognize, the Torah recognizes that animals, as human beings, we have responsibilities, which means that the animals have rights to expect us to do certain things. It means that we have responsibility to feed them, to do what's good for them. We find out when it comes to slaughtering animals, we're supposed to slaughter them in a way that shows respectfulness, that's whatever. But we're not supposed to show. We're supposed to show them respect. So, okay, there's one more passage in the Talmud that I want to do, and then we'll move on. I see nobody's calling in, so we'll be able to move on with this.
Okay.
In Bava Metzia 85a is a very interesting story about Rabbi Nakuda. Rabbi Nakuda is Rabbi Yehuda Anussi. It's a phenomenal story because, again, it emphasizes this concept of compassion that we're supposed to have for animals. Actually, what the Torah is teaching us with regards to animals, what kind of rights they have, how we're supposed to treat them. Okay, so it says that suffering came to Rebbe because of something he did, and suffering was taken away from him because of something else he did. Okay, very interesting teaching there. So what happened? What caused the suffering? There was one time, I'm going to say it quickly. One time Rebbe was walking along, and he sees that there is a calf who was being taken to be slaughtered, and it tried to run away, and it came to Rebbe that Rebbe should save him from being slaughtered. So Rebbe said, listen, you should go because this is what you're created for. It was, of course, true. The animals are there for our enjoyment, whatever. But the saying of it didn't seem to show compassion. Didn't recognize, the compassion you should have for an animal. And because of that, in heaven, it was decreed that since you didn't have any compassion for the suffering of this animal, I'm not going to show you compassion. So because of that, Rebbe had some suffering. Okay? So what caused it that it should go away? What happened that his suffering was caused to go away? Here it was brought upon him because he didn't show compassion for that animal was supposed to be slaughtered. He just said, hey, listen, this was supposed to be a little callous in the way of doing it. One time there was a servant, the servant girl who in the house of Rebbe, was cleaning around the house, and she came across these baby mice that were there. And she wanted to take them and get rid of them. So Rebbe said, no, leave them alone. Let them be. They're baby. Leave them alone. Let them live. Don't hurt them. And in heaven, they said, because you had compassion on them, we'll have compassion on you. It's very interesting to note. This is very interesting because it notes that, even on the smallest things, acts of compassion or lack of compassion, Hashem looks upon it in a very serious way. That, we're supposed to show compassion to animals. It's true that they're here for us to use, but still, in any case, you're supposed to show compassion. Even in that case, you're supposed to show compassion to them. Okay. So now let's do this. Let's do a comparison. Let's see what we see about Jesus here. These are famous stories, of course. It appears in Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So I'm going to do, let's say what's the short. I think Matthew is the shortest one. Let's do Matthew as the shortest one. Mark, it's a bit longer. I always like using Mark because, let me use Mark first and whatever, because Mark is actually the original one that these get them from. The other ones, they get it off of Mark. So let's do Mark. It's in chapter 5 of Mark, 1 through 13. Then came to the other side of the sea in the country of Gerasenes. Gerasenes, I'm not sure where it is. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit came. So somebody had an unclean spirit. We know stories of these. Talmud talks about them. We're going to see that even I'm going to give you a couple of stories from Baal Shem Tov, how he dealt with such issues. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with chains. For he'd often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains were wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces. And no one had the strength to subdue him. Okay, it seems there was some kind of a demon that was inside of him. Night and day among the tombs and the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from the distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Okay, so now Jesus is going to exercise. He's going to take out the spirit that's in him. Okay? Then Jesus said, "What is your name?" Very important, as name. He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Legion means a lot. He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country now. So he asked him to send not to. He knew his time's up there, so he's going to send him out. It's not coming. Now there was a hillside, a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." Okay? And he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out, entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. So, now, in the next verse, we see that the swineherds ran off and told the people of the city and the country. I guess he made them unemployed. But, so what do we see here? A very simple story here. We see that there was a demon in person, and Jesus very nicely takes out the demon from him. Something we see many stories about, not just in the New Testament. There's stories throughout history about that in various times in the Jewish people. We see it a lot of times also. And he sends it into animals to destroy the animals. Okay? Now, what do our friends say about it? Let's look at the hard sayings of Jesus again. Page 372, he mentions this. And this is very, very interesting. You want to think about this second and think about it in the context of what we've actually seen in the Talmud, how we're supposed to deal with animals, concept of animal rights, and things like that. Concerning the major issues in this passage, it becomes clear that the gospel writers were interested in quite different issues than those with which modern readers have struggled. We tend to romanticize the role of animals, while in the first century when animals were raised for food or for other useful purposes. So it sounds a little bit like his attitude towards the animals is the attitude that the Medrash castigates Rebbe the first time about the animal who was after slaughtered, showing no compassion for him. Okay? That's exactly the exact opposite of the Jewish values that we have in the Talmud in the first century. Everyone was filled with animal sacrifice, whether in secular marketplace or the temple. We also see the economics of the story, while the gospel writers were far more concerned with God's present provision and the future present heaven. Furthermore, we see the violence done to animals while the gospel writers were concerned with the violent, destructive behavior of demons and the effect on human beings. Okay, again, what's his point? Is that, so destroy the animals, but that time they didn't have concept of animals having rights, animals having to be treated in certain ways, and things like that. Whereas, as we see from the Talmud itself, that's actually not true. Among the Jewish people, there's always been, not back biblically it is, that we're supposed to feed the animals first. Biblically, that we're supposed to show respect for all of creation. Even those animals which we're allowed to eat, we still have to show a certain degree of compassion towards them when we're slaughtering, to slaughter them in certain ways. Now, our friends in the Jewish New Testament commentary also discuss the same issue. And here is what he says about it. Now here it says that Yeshua permitted the demons to enter the pigs, destroying harmless animals together with their owner's property, is raised as a moral argument against him, which it is. But God has permitted demonic expression with his evil consequences. Since the Garden of Eden, Job asked why, and God has got to do with second part. Someone suggested the demons destroying the pigs in order to prejudice the owners against Yeshua, which is what actually happened. Again, he accepts it, but he doesn't have really a clear answer as to why that should be the case. Now, what I thought would be interesting is, I guess we don't have any questions, and if we do, I'd to ask, just see if anyone wants to call later. I just want to bring, I actually have the English version of it, but it's a very famous word. There's a word called Shifchei Baal Shem Tov. Shifchei Baal Shem Tov is stories about the Baal Shem Tov. What makes them interesting and important is these stories have what we call yichus, an ancestry. Every story that's brought in here is cited back to the person who was either a first person having seen it or heard it from the first person who saw it. So they all talk about that. And depending on time, I will give one or two where we see, in fact, let me read this story here. Okay, this particular story here we're going to read is, in the English version, it's called The Baal Shem Tov Banishes a Demon. Okay, now, again, this starts off with telling the ancestry of the story where he heard from. I heard from the rabbi of a community, and also from the rabbi of the whole community of Pona, that in the whole community of Zabrij, 2 demons were seen in the women's section of the synagogue. The women were so frightened that they had to leave the synagogue. Okay. Again, we see there's a number of stories in here about it, but this one specifically because it's going to, okay. Rabbi Chaim, the Maggid of a community, went to sit in the synagogue. The demons appeared while he was studying, and he banished them. So they went and entered into his 2 children. Rabbi Chaim said for the Baal Shem Tov. So what happened is these demons went into children and started hurting them. The Baal Shem Tov went to sleep in his house of seclusion with Mar Tzvi the scribe, that was his scribe. He told them to bring the children to his sleeping quarters, and they did. When they went to bed, the Baal Shem Tov's couch was placed at the head of the table, and the scribe slept next to the Baal Shem Tov's head. They were not yet asleep when the demons came into the house. They stood at the door and mocked the Baal Shem Tov's way of singing L'chudoidi. It's a song we sing Friday night. The Baal Shem Tov rose and sat on his bed. He said to the scribe, "Have you seen them?" The scribe saw them also, but he tucked his head under the Baal Shem Tov's pillow and said, "Leave me alone." He was afraid to look at the demons that were there. When the demons finished mocking him, they went toward the children. Baal Shem Tov jumped from his couch and scolded them. "Where are you going?" They were not afraid. They said, "It is none of your business." They began to mock him again, to sing the Baal Shem Tov's melody, "Come, my beloved." The Baal Shem Tov did whatever he did, and 2 demons fell down and could not get up. They began to appeal to him and said, "See to it that the children recover immediately." One of them said, "What is done, since the internal organs are injured. We came to finish them off. It's still luck that you, sir, were here." "How and why did you go to the synagogue?" He said, "Because the cantor who used to sing in the synagogue with the one with the bass voice was a great adulterer. He purposely attracted women to sing. He thought about them, and they thought about him. And from these thoughts were created 2 demons, male and female, who live in the synagogue." Then what happens here is very important. He banished the demons. What he does, the Baal Shem Tov gave them a place at a certain well where human beings did not go. So what does he do? He sends the demons to a place where they cannot cause any harm. Okay? Rather than doing something where it might cause harm, he does not cause harm to anybody. Similar story. Again, remember, if you have the power Okay, so here I'll just say it in short because I see the time is running out also. Here he sees another case where a woman had a demon in her. The demon asked the Baal Shem to send him out, and he did it, and the Baal Shem sent him out, and he sent him to a place where he shouldn't be able to cause any harm. Okay, again, we see that the proper way of doing such things is to do it so that no harm comes to anybody or anything, neither animals nor humans or anything like that. Okay, I think that's where I'm going to end for today. So I'll see if there's any questions, or anybody wanting to call in.
All right, very good. And phone lines have been open this whole time, but I haven't heard anybody calling in yet. And I don't see any questions right off the bat. I'm going to scroll through them again just to make sure. No tags at all. A lot of commenting between them, but they're discussing between moderators and questions, or not questions, but topics people are talking about. So, okay, yeah, so that'll do it then. It's 5 o'clock now, anyway, so it's probably a good roundabout time.
A bit late, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I was concerned I wouldn't get through this whole thing that I wanted to do here, anyways. But
are you satisfied with your time that you've had?
What?
I said, are you satisfied with the time you had for today?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, it was fine.
Okay, good. Very good.
I'm always satisfied.
Right, I hear you. Very cool. All right. Well,
Okay, let's leave it here for now.
That sounds good.
Just no one's calling. I guess everybody's taking the holiday off and having a good time.
maybe so. Yeah. That's what I'm guessing too. So, very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a wrap then. All right, Rabbi. Thank you so much for your time and efforts.
So next week will be the same place, but our usual time.
Yes, sir.
7:30.
Yes, sir. Unless you find that this time is even better for you, and if it is, I might talk to Skoback and see if he wants to swap with you. So maybe you talk with your wife, see what she thinks, and I'll talk to him.
No, it's more convenient actually the later time.
Okay.
Because my wife is getting ready to go to work now. So.
Gotcha. Okay, very good. All right, well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you, Rabbi. And for all you viewers out there, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, turn on notifications, and that way you make sure you get all the alerts that come through. On screen right now, you've got 4 different counter-missionary resources for you. Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical 2-volume book set available at Amazon.com and OutreachJudaism.org. Judaism and Christianity at Contrast by Rabbi Stuart Federer, Revealing Matthew's Secrets by Jason LaCrosse, and Leaving Jesus by James Wood Jr. All these are great resources for you guys if you don't have any. So thank you all for tuning in once again, and we'll see you next week. Shalom,
חשוב תמיד להיות אנושי. אני אתה, אתם תמיד, כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. אני אתה, אתם תמיד, כולם ביחד. חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה. חושבים, דוברים, לובשים בכל האופנים, זה טבעם של אנשים שונים. נזכור בסוף, כולנו שותפים. חשוב תמיד להיות אנושיים. חושבים, דוברים, לובשים בכל האופנים, זה טבעם של אנשים שונים. שותפים